Well, hello there, folks. Welcome back. Hopefully that intro wasn't too big for you, but had a lot to talk about since Omar just came back. And this is your boy Chuck, and with me today is Omar.
What's up, everybody? You know me.
You know me. No need for introduction, right? And so today's episode, we have a special guest, okay? And we have mentioned these sort of topics, and sometimes we don't really get too deep into it. And if anyone can get into this subject really deep, it is the guest we have on today. And before we get started, Omar, why don't you just give him a proper introduction?
Sure thing. Let me give this special guest a special introduction. So Carl Teichrib is a researcher, writer, and lecturer focusing on the paradigm shift that's sweeping the Western world, including the challenges and opportunities faced by Christians. Over the years, he has attended a range of political, religious, and social events in his quest to understand the historical and contemporary forces of transformation, including the Parliament of World Religions, Burning Man, and the United Nations Millennium Forum. So Carl Teichrib has been working on this since the early 1990s, and we'd like to thank you very much for coming on the show today, Carl Teichrib.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you guys.
No, definitely. It's a pleasure for us. And like we were telling you a little bit before, we've been listening to you for quite a number of years now. And the first time I heard about you, Chuck and myself, we heard about you through Canary Cry Radio, and then that was it. We started listening, consuming a lot of your interviews, a lot of your lectures that you have online. You have quite a bit of lectures online that's really good. We'll put some of the links for some of those in the show notes. But when you came out with this, how long did you come out with Game of Gods? Like about a year ago?
Yeah, not quite. It came out last October, so I'm coming around to, I guess, like 8-9 months now into the lifespan of the book.
Right.
So it's kind of been a fun ride too. I mean, you never know where your material is going to go and how it's going to be used, and there's been some exciting things that's happened with it.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember when this book came out, I mean, it was everywhere. And of course, I had to purchase it, buy my own copy. And I've been reading it for about 4 months now. And I'm only about like 50 pages in because it's a big book. And I'm not trying to say this in a derogatory way. It's dense, and I don't mean anything bad by that, because I like dense books. I like books because you have so much information and so much footnotes that are good.
Well, Omar, I appreciate that. In fact, I knew that when I was writing the book, the way I was tackling the subject, how I was approaching it, this wasn't going to be the kind of book that you could just sit down in an afternoon and consume. Mm-hmm. It certainly didn't take me an afternoon to write. Let me tell you.
No, of course not. No, this book has a lot. This book reminds me of a lot of somewhat kind of textbooks. That's what it feels like almost. It comes out in a narrative sense, but it's more of a textbook type of deal. That's the way I feel it is, because the reason it has taken me so long is because I keep going to the links. I keep going to all the footnotes because I want to see, okay, what is this saying more? Where did you get this information? And that's it. That'll take you a couple of days just to figure that out. Not to figure out where it comes from, but to figure out the information and to really get into it so you can comprehend it. You don't have to do that, but that's the type of person I am. I just like doing that.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate that. See, that's the whole point of why I referenced it as extensively as I did. I wanted my reader, for those who have that kind of an interest, to be able to use the book as a reference, to use it as a source that they can then go to and explore these subjects in more detail. And so there's exactly 1,800 footnotes in the book. Wow, yes, yeah. It's a lot of work putting all of that together, but it did that specifically knowing that there would be a segment of my readership who are research-oriented and would appreciate that.
Indeed. So, Carl, I'd like to let you understand, we're called Fire Theft Radio, right? And we kind of mentioned to the people that listen to our show, we like to tell them where that came from because, some people, especially the fringe community and the conspiracy community, they get a little bit riled up when they don't see all Christian symbols or references, and they start accusing me of being even Luciferian at one point. And I was like, wow, that's pretty awesome. And I keep telling Omar, like, when they do that, it's like you made it in the podcast world, like in the fringe. It's like, yes, you made it. I've been accused of being Luciferian, but we get the reference from Prometheus, and there's this idea of taking knowledge and giving it to the people, and we had this idea of taking the knowledge back and giving it back to the people in a manner in which we feel is with more research, a manner in which we feel people can do their own research. And if people were to listen to our episodes, we always want to give them information to do the research of their own, and not just, hey, believe me, this is what it is and that's it. And I don't think that's a good approach to believe in anything, And I'm a big, I strongly believe that when knowledge is corrupted, it really births the death of wisdom. It's hard to really discern what is real, what is not, and what is true. And so that being said, we want to dive into the current situation of like Burning Man and all those things, which is something that you've been working alongside of. You have a special ministry that you're working with, doing events, going to these events like a Burning Man and stuff like that. And I just want you to kind of talk about that. What was that?
Oh no, sorry. I was thinking to myself, saying like, what led you to say that?
Oh yeah. Sorry, no, it's okay. I was like, what? Did I mess something up?
No.
Oh yeah. What led you to start doing that in the first place? And why are you going to Burning Man? What's going on? You trying to have some fun over there? What's going on, Carl?
Well, it's a good question. It's a great question, because there's not a lot of people doing what I'm doing regarding Burning Man. In fact, I can count how many basically on one hand, maybe two hands, with a couple of fingers left over. The reason I have a special interest with that particular event is, and I'll give you a little bit of some context, a backstory. I've been researching and writing and lecturing on global transformation full-time since 1997. From 97 to 2001, I was the director of research for a Christian ministry led by a man by the name of Gary Kaw. He had written a couple of books on very similar subjects, the New World Order, interfaithism, and these connecting points. And I've been, even before that, I started, sometime in the early 1990s, like 91 or 1990, started diving into these topics. By the mid-1990s, it was a hobby out of control. And then from 97 on, this has been my full-time work, my full-time endeavor. And so, with that being said, I had spent a lot of time, and I mean a lot of time, diving into the political side of internationalism. I attended UN events. I embedded myself deeply into world government movements. And when I'm saying embedded myself, I had memberships. I attended meetings. I was sitting in the same rooms, going through agendas and different ideas, and I bring some of that out in the book. Especially, I believe chapter 11 brings a lot of that out. And then on the interfaith side, I started to attend. Try to understand the spiritual aspect of oneness, the spiritual aspect of collectivism. So I began to attend interfaith events going back right to the year 2000. I was at the United Religions Initiative Charter Summit, their global summit, the very first one that kicked off their charter and their organization officially, and have been to other events in similar nature. And along the way, been to different pagan events, New Age conferences. The list just goes on. A lot of stuff. But by the early 2000s, I think about 2000, I was aware of Burning Man. I was aware that there was a cultural side to oneness, a cultural side to this idea of exploring new spirituality. But I really didn't take a lot of time to unpack it, or I didn't even really have the time to unpack it. Not until about 2008, 2009, I began to explore this a little bit more. By 2013, I was exploring it quite a bit, really trying to wrap my head around, okay, how does this all fit? Because if there is a political side to globalization, a political side to oneness, and there is, if there is a religious side, and there is, if there's a philosophical aspect to it, and there is, if technology can fit into it, and it does through transhumanism, then all of that said, there has to also be a cultural side. There has to be an expressive group cultural dynamic that goes with it. And absolutely, there is. And Burning Man reflects that. And Burning Man isn't just the only one. There's a broader cultural milieu that Burning Man fits into. You could call it evolutionary culture or transformational culture. And it's a movement that basically says we are expressing our oneness. We're finding and experiencing our own spirituality, our higher self, the divine we. And so a lot of people think of Burning Man simply as a party. And yes, oh yes, it has a party aspect. There is no question about it. Oh yeah. A lot of people think of it just purely from the sense of this is a place of sexual adventure. Yes, there is a very strong element of sexual adventurism. There is it's definitely a place where moral boundaries become blurred very quickly. You have to already know before you step foot into the place already where are your lines in the sand. And that's definitely something you have to take into consideration. And it's also a place where spirituality and the idea of the higher self, especially in a group context, is being played out and experimented with. And the one thing that a lot of people don't realize about Burning Man, because they typically focus, and as Christians, we typically focus, when we look at events like this, on the party, on the sex, on the morality.
Mm-hmm.
And in so doing, we tend to end up losing sight that there's even a bigger picture that's in play. The party, the morality, is a consequence, actually, of a worldview. It's a consequence already of a spiritual belief system. And so I attend a lot of workshops. I go to a lot of lectures. This is really the place where Silicon Valley comes together. It is their unofficial United Nations. If you want to know what's happening in terms of that crossroad of high technology, spirituality, psychedelics, social change, kind of the revolution that's percolating throughout our civilization, you just spend time at Burning Man, hopping from lecture to lecture, workshop to workshop, and you very quickly realize that this is a place where there's heavy hitters, and they are very open to talk about what their vision looks like. And gentlemen, of all the different events I've been to, and this is something that it took me some time to unpack. I mean, I've been to lots of World Federalist events. I've been to a couple of UN events. I've been to quite a few global governance events. All of that is, suits and ties, heavy agendas. The agendas are already set. They're already in motion. I've been to lots of interfaith stuff. Same thing. The pagan side, when I go to pagan conferences, pagan events, it's a little more informal, but there's still, there's a structure to it. Burning Man is a little bit different. Where those other events are more closed door, Burning Man is more open source. Kind of a place where the event itself is the sandbox to play with these ideas. And so that's what makes it a little bit different. The whole dynamic is different because you can spend the whole week there and not run into that side of it.
Yeah,
but it is there if you know what to look for.
Right. And, as you speak and you're talking about going to events with the United Nations, you're going to these like heavy hitter conferences, no one would imagine that that's connected somehow to like something like Burning Man or like you said, Silicon Valley, or the technology world with spirituality, and we, like I said, I like you to get into that aspect because really I know a lot of different kinds of Christians from different denominations, and really this doesn't click. Like this doesn't connect. Or like technology involved with spirituality, or political agendas involved with spirituality.
Yeah, I mean, most people don't realize that that just politics is just downstream from culture, and that culture really drives politics, bro. It always has.
Right. And I mean, my goodness, if you take a look at Burning Man's, basically its footprint, especially in American culture, it's really interesting. I mean, last year the Smithsonian dedicated the entire Renwick Gallery to Burning Man and to Burning Man's art. Right now, there's a huge art exhibition in the Cincinnati Museum of Art, all dedicated again to Burning Man and its culture. Okay, when it hits the Smithsonian and takes up an entire gallery building, that's pretty significant. That says something.
Yeah. I mean, the way politics, culture, and religion interact with each other it's impossible to separate them because we're talking about ideologies, you know? We're talking about the belief system, the identity of these individuals. And so whatever they place their identity on, they're going to transfer it to the politics, to all of that. So in what you've been studying and what you've been seeing through these events, I believe you call them transformative events, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. What led you to even come up with that name? Because the first time I heard about it, I was like, whoa, that's true. And can you explain to the listeners who've never heard it, that phrase, or give us a little bit more of the information on that? Because to me, that was super interesting.
Yeah, sure. It's not my phrase. It comes out of the culture itself. It's what they call themselves.
Whoa.
And that's important. Oh, yeah. And that brings it to a different level then right away, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you just an example. G.K. Lung, who is a Canadian, kind of a performance artist, festival advocate, he described it as these events as transformational festivals already back in 2010, and that language was being used even before he introduced it through TEDx. But his TEDx talk in Vancouver in 2010, he said this, and this is a direct quote, and this will help you guys to unpack what a transformational gathering or transformational festivals, kind of the current that runs through it. Here's G.K. Lung. No less profound is this emergence of a new type of spiritual culture in these festivals, a spiritual culture completely uninterested in charismatic leaders, dogmas, or doctrine, where ritual does not require that we surrender our autonomy as critical thinking individuals, but instead arises as the shared acknowledgement and honoring of our sacred experience together. That's transformation, guys. That's transformational culture.
Man, it's crazy to hear that. It's like, you said earlier, Omar, culture is what drives these things. But to me, it would seem like these are the places where you want to engineer culture towards us.
Culture is born, like you were saying right now.
And do you think, Carl, like, because we talked about certain things, and people right off the bat, they're like, that's a conspiracy. Like, there's no way the government or people at Burning Man or something are trying to have some sort of big agenda. Like, since you've attended these events, can you see like the very purposeful type of, like, what you might call social engineering or cultural engineering going on in these events, and especially, do they connect really with, like, the meetings that you've been going to and Burning Man?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'll just give you one example. Last year, I attended a workshop on the question of psychedelics, spirituality, and technology, specifically cryptocurrencies. And the gentleman giving the lecture, and there was a Q&A to it. It was very open. People could interject. The event lasted about 2 hours long. The individual leading it was a very well-known personality in the cryptocurrency community, quite well-known in the Bitcoin community. He's really a leading light within cryptocurrency. And he had just come back from I believe it was like a 4-day ayahuasca journey, and he was giving us, in a sense, his new download. What he envisioned the new culture to look like. And so keep in mind, he didn't expressively say this the way I'm going to bring that out. I'm paraphrasing. This is more or less the Cole's notes of his 2-hour presentation and then the Q&A that developed around it. But he more or less broke down what his new vision for society to look like. He broke it down into 4 building blocks. The first one he described as a new spirituality. That's block 1. No longer a Judeo-Christian worldview. This new spirituality instead is psychedelic, it's shamanistic, it's mystical, it's green, it's feminine, it's about oneness, it's about connection. Then he talked about and described what we were doing at Burning Man was the creation of a new social ethos, a new ethic. And what we're doing is we are experimenting with this in real time at the burn. The burn is the sandbox to play around with new ideas in relationships, new ideas in terms of how to engage at a social level, how to create an ethic around that. I mean, that's part of the 10 principles of Burning Man. That's why when you go to the burn, you end up even inevitably, and this has happened the both years I've attended, where you run into workshops on polyamory, on questions of how to engage in an open lifestyle with your partner, and you're looking around the room in these workshops, and you're going, these are all adults. These are not young. This is not the typical college age party goers. That's not the kind of people who are engaging in these questions. So he broke down block number 2 as a new social ethic. And then he gave us the concept of economics and governance. He gave us a building block with that. He described that as a cryptocurrency. We need some cryptocurrency that's tied to the new social contract that reflects block 1, a new spirituality, and block 2, a new social ethos. And you're buying and selling, your governance in terms of buying and selling, your behavior in buying and selling would have to reflect block 1 and block 2. Okay, I mean, this is serious.
Is this China or what?
Crazy
What's
stuff.
What's going on here?
I know. And then the big question was, how do you manage this at a global level? How do you manage this
at a global level?
Wow.
Huh?
It's artificial intelligence.
Ooh.
Okay, now
So that's the level of conversations. That's the level of visioning you see when you go to Burning Man.
I guess it comes from and I'm gonna I'm looking at it through the other side now. I guess it comes from a place of wanting to do good, right? Because I really don't believe, for this personally, and you can go ahead and tell me if I'm wrong. I don't believe that these people are trying to do evil. Maybe. But what do you think from your experiences of being there? What's the vibe? Like,
yeah.
Where does it come from?
Most people, Chuck, most of these people, including different events I've been to, World Federalist events, most of these people are coming from the perspective of we believe that what we're doing is good and righteous. It is what is necessary to bring the world together for peace and harmony. Their position is that what they are doing is for the best. It is for the good of all. Where I have heard it expressed in a way that definitely doesn't fit that, and I've heard it a few different times where it's obvious from different thought leaders that they're thinking when it comes to Christianity, they're not happy. They're not happy with us at all. So I'll give you just one example. That was at the Parliament of World Religions in 2018. The Parliament of World Religions, its theme was the power of inclusion, the promise of love, or something to that effect. In fact, let me just get my agenda book. Yeah, the promise of inclusion, the power of love. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But in the space of 7 days, I heard so many derogatory remarks towards anybody, and I mean harsh derogatory remarks, very uncomfortable, new tones and new language compared to some of the other events I've been to, against anybody who believes that there is only one way to heaven. How dare you? That's supremacy thinking. It's no longer fundamentalism. It's no longer extremism. Both of those can be discussed. Both of those, we can break those down and have a discussion around. But no, now you're a supremacist. And please understand, it's events like these that set the tone. They set the language. So we were considered supremacists. Anybody who believes in the free market, you're a supremacist. If you hold to any type of national patriotism, you're a supremacist. And you guys, myself, your audience, anybody who fits into that mold, we were deemed to be the enemies. And indeed, we are standing in the way of the salvation of the world. That was their language, guys. Their language.
Wow.
That we are standing in the way of the salvation of the world. That hit me because I realized, okay, their venom, their strong animosity towards us comes from, in their mind, a righteous anger because we stand in the way of global salvation.
You know, it's crazy to me. I don't know if people are noticing this, but the language you're using sounds a lot like what the liberal parties right now are pushing, these agendas, like even earlier when you said the future is like, and it needs to be feminine, it needs to be this, and you're like, wait a minute, that sounds a lot like what's going on here.
That sounds like Kathleen Kennedy. Was she there?
Kathleen Kennedy.
Hey, Carl, was Kathleen Kennedy there?
Why you gotta keep bringing Kathleen Kennedy? You're so mad at her for
I'm
ruining
still mad.
Star Wars.
Yeah. Was she there? Tell me the truth. Did you see at Burning Man? Was she dressed like Kylo Ren?
Probably. Kathleen Kennedy.
Here's the crazy thing with the burn. You might be rubbing shoulders with like big executives or Hollywood stars. You might not know it because, they're all in costume. You do end up rubbing shoulders with some interesting fellows. I was way deep in the playa in 2017 at a guy, at a booth or whatever it was, giving out soup. And of course, the place is a gifting economy, so there's no exchange. It's literally gifting, not barter, gifting. And so this guy had this little soup truck out there, and he was giving away soup. And I am yakking with the guy beside me. It turns out he was some high-end fashion designer dealing with high-end jewelry from Paris. We ended up talking out there out in the desert, eating soup in the middle of the night, talking, jewelry. It was weird.
That is kind of
weird. And I'll be honest, I'm not up with pop culture. 2017, I ran into this blonde chick. She obviously was somebody of high importance in the pop culture world. She wasn't a politician. I knew that much. She had an entourage of like 25, 30 people all around her, doting over everything. And I'm looking at this from like, 20 yards away, watching this show, this spectacle, as this lady, this pop star or whatever she is, has this group of people, fans and handlers and whatever else, all around her. Everywhere she went, this group was with her. And I watched it for a while. I felt sad. I felt sick. I got on my bike and I rode away, just me, myself, and I. And I went, yes, I'm free compared to her.
What's the driving force there, Carl? What is pushing people? What is moving people to express themselves in this way, to create this sense of community? Like, what's maybe I just said it a little bit myself, but in your opinion, like, what is the driving force behind all of this?
Oh, there's a few things. First of all, this really is a reflection of the culture around you, and that's really important for people to realize. This is the reflection of the culture of our day. It just simply is that collective expression of it, and demand far outstrips supply. Getting tickets to Burning Man is really, really difficult. In fact, I had my vehicle pass to go this year. I still don't have my personal ticket, so my car can go. But I can't, at least. And it's crazy. So we're trying to put a fundraiser together even. It's an expensive endeavor. But I'll tell you, there's a few reasons why that event draws so many people to it. And please keep in mind, this isn't the only event. There are oodles more. And in fact, Burning Man has an entire global regional network of events. There's a Burning Man in Israel. There's a Burning Man in South Africa. There's a number of Burning Man in Canada. The U.S. has Burning Man events. Pretty well in every region of the U.S. There are regional burns. Here's a few things about it that draw people to it. It is a spectacle. It is a show. It's a fascinating spectacle. I ran into a couple of retired people last year, maybe the year before. They were from Ottawa, Canada. We were talking for a while, and I said, "Hey, why are you guys here?" They're retired. There's a lot of people in that age bracket, by the way. You'd be surprised. And I just wanted to know, why are you guys attending Burning Man? And they said, hey, we've been attending it for years. It's kind of like a fantasy Disneyland adventure. Every year it's different. Every year it's a spectacle. It's always exciting and wild. And it is. It is. The lights, the fire, everything that's happening.
The way they promote it, it looks amazing. They got the best photographers taking pictures, video, things different. The highlight reels are amazing. I was going to ask you, you mentioned other Burning Mans, but do you think similar things are going on with like maybe not so, I don't know, technology driven events, more like these events like EDC, Electric Daisy Carnival? Like, what do you think of those things? Because as I'm watching those, like I see some of the symbols and some of the things in the background that people just love, like, oh, that looks amazing. But I'm like, those look like pagan gods, and
That's like an
that it's like a ritual going on right now, and I just
Right.
it looks to me, because it's the stuff that we research. It seems to be connected, and I personally know, unfortunately, a lot of believers, a lot of Christians that really just kind of engage and go over there. They just try to have a good old time. But I'm like, I don't know, guys. it's a little bit shady for me.
Yeah, it seems like they're worshiping Molech.
Yeah,
Like literally, it's like what was that where Alex Jones went?
I don't know.
Bohemian Grove.
Okay.
Remember how you exposed Bohemian Grove?
Oh yeah.
Would that be considered a transformative event there, Carl? Bohemian Grove?
It would be considered, I guess, that way, from a political point of view, because from what I understand, that's kind of like the place for political movers and shakers.
Yeah.
The thing though with these events, whether it's an EDM event, it's a trance event like Boom or Ozora, which are pretty big in Europe. You need to realize that there's a range of evolutionary culture. There's a range of these festivals. It isn't just there is no one model that they all fit under. You have transformational events like Burning Man, Evolve Fest, Lightning in a Bottle. There's oodles of those that really are meant to be transformative. Then, because of our the West's interest in Eastern spirituality and new spirituality, there's all kinds of Eastern Hindu styled yoga festivals that have popped up. The Holi Festival of Colors is just one example, and 70,000 mostly Mormons go to the Sri Raja Krishna Temple, the Lotus Temple south of Salt Lake City, and for 2 or 3 days chant Hare Krishna, Rama Rama.
What? What?
Oh my God, guys,
I didn't know about that. You got to talk a little bit more about that.
a cultural movement that is far bigger than one event. Then you have mythical festivals like Fairy Fest and Gaia Fest, and in Washington State, you've got a Fairy Human Congress that gets together. Then you have pagan gatherings. These are flat. Right. And then you have pagan gatherings, flat out pagan gatherings, like Pagan Spirit Gatherings, Starwood. These bring in 2,000-3,000, mostly Wiccans and witches, and people from various other neo-pagan branches. And for a number of days, they will be having a festival. In fact, this coming up weekend, not this weekend, but the next weekend, I believe there's a couple taking place. Cirrus Rising is happening in New York State. The Pan Pagan Festival is happening in Monterey, Indiana. So you've got a range. And then you've got music and art festivals like Ness Creek in Saskatchewan and Bonnaroo, and they kind of incorporate a music, art, a green communal kind of a vibe. And again, those are also they also have like a transformational side to it. And then you have massive mega event concerts. And probably the best example of that, which has an intentional, that's why I listed in terms of evolutionary culture, because it has an intentional message of oneness, of collectivism, of the greater re-enchanted we, and that is Tomorrowland. Tomorrowland by far kicks that into high gear. And I think this weekend, right now as we're talking, Tomorrowland is taking place in Belgium. But it is always an immersive spectacle, an immersive experience with literally a preaching through the event itself that we are all one. The world is one. We all need to come together as one. You and I, we are all divine. We are all connected to nature, and we are all divine. And this messaging just plays through that culture. So there is a range, a broad range that you could fit all this under. I started doing a research project back in 2013. I was pinning on Google Maps, and I've got my own little pinning project I did where I started to put pins down in Canada and the U.S. where these events took place from 2013 to 2016. I quit halfway through 2016 because I was so overwhelmed already. I had 265 pins on the map.
Wow.
I think I had another 50 or 80 to add, another 50 or 80 to vet. It had consumed a tremendous amount of time, but what it did do is it demonstrated that, yes, this is real. This is broad. It has a vast scope, and it really reflects the change that's already happened in your neighborhood. A lot of these events were quite small, a few hundred, maybe a few thousand. Some were really big, like Burning Man, which is 80,000. But it really just reflects the fact that the Western culture, has changed.
Now, as I'm thinking back, what I realized that most of the time when you hear any politician, for example, speak about anything religious, I don't know, especially here in America, it's usually on the Christian side. No one's really talking too much, not as much, or maybe I haven't heard it, about all these other things like the being really open about, pagan stuff and all this, other kinds of religions and stuff like that. But it would seem that it's well infiltrated in a lot of like government officials and things like that. And I don't want to, actually I do want to name drop. I was going to say I don't want to name drop, but I do, because I'm thinking to myself, the people that I hear the most talk about this kind of stuff, this oneness, is like celebrities, powerful celebrities too. Like I hear Oprah been talking that nonsense since the 90s, you know what I mean? And I remember it actually a lot, where she was, had a lot of Christian people on the show, kind of like, especially the ones that were a little bit more outrageous and a little more charismatic, and just, making that look horrible, like painting a horrible picture of what Christianity is, and then at the same time she was like, no, there's this, we are one, and she had the whole Deepak Chopra on for a while and really pushed his agenda. And then I've heard, like the rapper Common, he's when he finishes his performances, he's like, God is in us all, we are all one, love and compassion and oneness and all these different things, where I'm like, back then I just didn't, it sounds good, it sounds like if to the person who doesn't have the knowledge of these things, it sounds like, why wouldn't you want oneness? Why wouldn't you want, this, what they promote, this love? Who doesn't want love and togetherness? Like, who doesn't want that?
Right.
The problem is the definition of those terms, what does that mean? And I think you said it earlier. Yeah, oneness and love and let's accept each other, but very derogatory and very, except for Christianity, any perspective that comes from actual Christianity, like no, let's slide that aside, or not just slide it aside, but like very brutally talk against it, and I don't know, who do you see, or who have you known in the political realm that kind of goes along with this, who kind of like is very obviously entangled in some, oneness, as you said earlier, re-enchantment, new age kind of stuff?
Well, before we jump into that, and I do want to go to it, I think I need to quickly define oneness and the opposite to that, right, to your audience. First of all, oneness, what we were talking about here, oneness is a paradigm or a worldview, and it basically says man, God, and nature are all essentially the same. Man, God, and nature share the same essence. There is no division within the realms. There are no separating points really as core between those three realms. The biblical worldview is it's the opposite. There are separating points. In fact, God is distinct, separate, and completely unique from the rest of creation. It is the creator and then the creation. My friend Dr. Peter Jones puts it as this way: oneism, which is oneness, versus twoism, not dualism, twoism, God and then everything else. And then even within that, within the twoism aspect, you can break things down even more. You can break things down and recognize that reality isn't oneness. Reality in every aspect of reality. In fact, it is so commonplace. It is all around us continually. Reality is otherness. It is separation. I'm not the same as the chair I'm sitting on right now. I'm not the same as the clothes I'm wearing. I'm not the same as this piece of technology I'm talking through right now to discuss this with you. Separating points are everywhere, and this allows us to have judgment, discernment, values, laws, ethics, morality, relationships, love, hate, the list goes on. It's interesting because I talk to my onist friends and they always say, that what we want, what we need is a better tomorrow. We're hoping for a better tomorrow. Well, I'm sorry. If you're intellectually honest with oneness, there is no tomorrow. There is no better. You have no hope.
Wow.
Because if it's all one, you're cancer and you are one and the same. Your best day is the same as your worst day. There is no love. There is no hate. It's a grand mush of nothingness. Right. But that's not what reality demonstrates.
Yeah,
reality demonstrates that there are divisions all the way through.
Right. It's like going back to that whole moral relativism. It's like everything is relative, and I think that's what oneness. If you really think about it critically, that's what it ends up being. It's more relativism. Right,
until you disagree with them, and then they have an absolute that they stand on against you, even while they're claiming oneness and that it's morally relative.
Yeah. Right, you can't. But according to them, you can't be absolute about anything. So how are you absolute about what you know?
See, nobody really lives oneness.
Only the deal in absolutes.
The advocates of oneness constantly talk about how separation is an illusion, otherness is an illusion. I'm sorry, it's the exact opposite. Separation and otherness is the reality. Oneness is the illusion. If you truly believed in your oneness, don't stop at the stop sign when you're driving your car. Yeah. Don't look both ways when you cross the street. I think Ravi Zacharias brought that out. Become one with the bus.
That's funny. I was thinking of Ravi myself. Yeah, Get out of my head, Carl.
But nobody really lives out oneness. Not that in that respect. We feed our bodies. We look for comfort. We do have hope in tomorrow, or we want to have hope in tomorrow. We do have values and distinctions and judgments. Even the onist, for you to argue those positions as a onist demonstrates you are living a reality of otherness because you have judgments and distinctions that you're drawing into the argument.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that said, the question you had regarding the political side, do you see politicians involved in this? I'm going to take it one step higher. Policy. Not just politicians. Policy. And I'll give you the example of, let's say, your Green New Deal that's being pushed. And it was such it was in the news so much this spring.
I'm sorry.
That's a onist, but that comes absolutely out of a onist perspective. And in fact, you could take a look at the entire green agenda, sustainable development. All that comes out of a onist perspective that says ultimately nature is divine. I'll give you guys an example. These are the closing words at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. Now, the Rio Earth Summit was the summit that set in motion the green movement in terms of the political side, sustainable development, climate change, biodiversity, the list goes on. We wouldn't have all these things in the way we do if it hadn't been for the 1992 Earth Summit. It's a key part of seeing our world transform. So the closing statements at the 1992 Earth Summit from UN Secretary Boutros Boutros-Ghali, this is what he said. This gentleman is re-enchantment. Let me read this little quote. I should like to conclude by saying that the spirit of Rio must create a new form of good citizenship. After loving his neighbor as the Bible required him to, post-Rio man must also love the world, including the flowers, birds, and trees, every part of that natural environment that we are constantly destroying. Over and above the moral contract with God, over and above the social contract concluded with men, we must now conclude an ethical and political contract with nature, with this earth to which we owe our very existence and which gives us life. To the ancients, the Nile was a god to be venerated, as was the Rhine, an infinite source of European myths, or the Amazonian forest, the mother of forests. Throughout the world, nature was the abode of the divinities that gave the forest, the desert, or the mountains a personality which commanded worship and respect. The earth had a soul. To find that soul again, to give it new life, that is the essence of Rio. And that, gentlemen, is re-enchantment. That is the pagan ideal, not the New Age ideal, which says it's about my own self, finding my own divine self. But re-enchantment takes it one step further. It says it's not about me or the I. It is about we, and we in connection to nature, we in connection to the cosmos. It is really a new pagan ideal. It's re-enchantment.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of romanticizing, right? A lot
Yes.
a lot of romanticizing about the topics, about nature, about people. It's a lot of fairy tales, and negating human nature, and it's a terrible thing. How many Christians you come across in these events? Because
the way you said that, how many?
Because we're humans too.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. Last year at the Burn, by the way, at Burning Man, we put up a camp called the Camp of the Unknown God, and we have a sign that says that. Because there has to be more than just information. It has to go beyond just exploring these ideas from an information point of view. But now, how do we make it practical? How do we bring this into play? And so we set up a camp with a sign, Camp of the Unknown God. And last year we had this couple. They were a retired couple that riding their bicycle by our camp stopped to talk to us about our sign. They were very concerned because they thought maybe we were being derogatory towards Christianity. And then they found out it's the exact opposite. And we were discussing with them, like, what's your background? What do you guys believe? And it turns out they were Christians. And we were like, well, what are you guys even doing here? And they just, they had heard about it, read about it. It seemed like kind of like the All-American Vacation. And they were just there to check it out.
All-American Vacation.
They had no other reason. And for them, they thought that we were mocking Christianity. And they were like, we were going to get an earful if that was the case.
Wow.
And if they found out it was the exact opposite, we were there to witness. We were there to do outreach. And our sign, the Camp of the Unknown God, is a lightning rod for conversations. Hey, guys, we've had people walk by and literally blurt out, who is the unknown God? And I talk a little bit about it in my book. One particular time when I had a young Russian esoteric artist stopped at the camp. We ended up having a long conversation. He's a onist completely. And as an artist, he was telling me about his artwork and how it reflected his onist worldview. And we had already gone down some paths on oneism versus twoism because that's a great starting point.
Right.
Basically, it takes Paul's approach of representing God is the creator first. You see that in Acts 17 as well. And so I said to him, are you telling me that as an artist, your art has the same value as you, the artist? And he was quiet. And he goes, well, of course not. I have more value than my art. I'm the creator of my art piece. Of course I'm different than my art. And all of a sudden he has a smile across his face because he's getting it. And I'm like, are you telling me that God, the ultimate artist, is the same as his art piece? And he's like, I've got to rethink some things.
Oh.
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds
okay.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, I totally see what you're saying. And going back a little bit to the whole Christian thing, it sounds to me that those people who were talking to you, right? They were Christian. They were over there like, how dare he try to mock Christianity?
Right.
It sounds absurd because they're in a place that's openly everything is mocking Christianity.
I know.
So they go and they attack the Christian.
Yeah, there's artwork all over the place that mocks Christianity. In fact, of all the religions that are mocked, well, pardon me, let me put it this way. Of all the religions that are kind of represented in art format, Christianity is the only one that is truly being mocked.
Yeah.
Everything else is accepted.
Where have we
and there's
No, go ahead.
And
Sorry.
I don't know how they didn't see it. I don't know how they didn't see that, but maybe they just stuck around their neighborhood because it's a big place.
Yeah.
Hung around the camps around their neighborhood. That could be it. I don't know. I have met other Christians in
You're too
different
nice.
events.
They're a Burning Man.
Yeah, and like I said, I have met some other Christians in different events or people claiming to be Christian. I'll give you an example. The 2015 Parliament of the World Religions, Brian McLaren, kind of the godfather of the emergent church movement. He gave a plenary address on climate change. Hey, if Brian McLaren can talk about climate change, I can talk about it. You can talk about it. My neighbor's 6-year-old kid can talk about it. But he, Brian McLaren's perspective at the 2015 Parliament was, the earth is groaning to us. The earth is singing to us. The earth is crying to us, and we need to be brothers and sisters to the earth. And his comments were basically onist comments. His comments and his perspective fit with the pagans that were there. And then, as I write about in chapter 11 of my book, I had a situation where I was at the Millennium Forum, the United Nations Millennium Forum, and spent some time talking to a lady there. We ended up chatting pretty much every day because we sat fairly close in the plenary sessions. And she was part of a working group on peace or something to that effect. And I was in a working group on restructuring world order. Literally, that was the working group I was part of. And partway through the week, I think it was like on Thursday or something, she said to me, she says, "Where are you going? Like, what working group are you a part of?" So I told her. And I said, "Come check it out," because her working group, she said, was getting boring. It was bogged down in details, and so she came with me to my working group on restructuring world order. And that was the day that we were working through the creation and the vision of developing a global parliamentary assembly, literally a Congress for the world. And it was a really heated meeting. We had a large room full of people. The chairman of the event had his own vision of what a global parliament would look like. Others in the room had their versions of it. They all wanted the same goals, but they all had different ways of getting to it. There was a lot of egos in the room. There was a lot of agendas at stake, a lot of organizations with budget lines to fill out. And so everybody had a different perspective. And it was heated, but the topic was so intense, so daunting, so collectivizing, because it was about a global parliamentary assembly, that the lady I had beside me, who I brought in as a guest, she started to shake. She literally was shaking. And the moderator stopped, pointed at her and said, you've got a problem. And she said, no. And she was from a third world country, and she had a little thicker accent. She's like, no. And she got herself under control. And as we left, she was muttering under her breath with her accent, "This is the beast. This is the Antichrist." Ooh. And I'm like, girl, are you a Christian? She says, yes. Yeah. And I'm like, why are you here? And she had to go and step in because she was part of a global NGO organization dealing with youth. Her boss, who heads up the organization, couldn't go at the last minute because of an illness. And so she was asked to step in, and she didn't even really know why she was there.
That is crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, it's easy for people to stereotype all kinds of stuff within the Christian realm, especially the conspiracy side. But there's complexities. There's people accidentally bumping in, and then there's people very, very conscious about what they're doing.
Yeah, where does
but unless you're going, though, you don't see that.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily see those nuances.
In your opinion, like, where has the where have we missed? What have we missed as Christians? Are we just too entangled in culture as Christians? Is that the problem? We can't see the obvious signs? Because standing from our point, Chuck and myself, to us, we're a little bit more experienced in this, and so we can see the signs. We can hear these words, and we're like, I don't know about that. And what's going on with our fellow brothers and sisters who are at these events, who let their children go to these events? Like, what's going on there, in your opinion?
Well, I think a lot of times we don't really think much about it at all. And I'll broaden this out a little bit more. In the late 90s, early 2000s, I was troubled. I was troubled by the fact that it seemed that it didn't matter what was said. Christians weren't interested in these subjects, weren't really interested in knowing the worldview behind them. And to be honest, there's times when we have sensationalized instead of keeping our focus on what is the worldview. We tend to chase after, let's say, even the gadgetry of it. Transhumanism is a great example. The gadgetry of transhumanism is incredible, and some of the direction it's going is amazing and pretty frightening. And we can sensationalize with that. And in doing so, sometimes we lose fact that there is a definable worldview behind it, and the worldview is what really we should be focusing on, because the gadgetry is a consequence of that worldview, not the other way around. And so there's a tendency sometimes within our own community to not have our facts right and to really focus more on whatever the more sensational fads are at the time. I think that's a part of it. But in the late 90s and early 2000s, what kind of bothered me was I didn't see Christian leadership, pastors and so on, really getting what we were doing in terms of trying to warn, hey, this worldview is here, this oneness is here. It's exerting itself in politics, in culture, in our education system. It's coming through television. It's your kids, your own school, church kids are getting this in the school, getting it shoved down their throats. How come you don't see it?
Yeah.
And it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around it. And I was at a place for a while where I'd get kind of the proverbial pat on the head from pastors saying, you got they're there now, Carl. It's not really bad.
I know all too well.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
And I'm screaming inside, going, you don't understand that in the next 10 years, 15 years, this is going to totally shape your world. It's going to be literally in your house.
Yeah.
How come you don't see this?
Yeah,
and now I kind of understand why, because number one, church leaders, especially pastors, are already busy. They are overwhelmed, busy with trying to keep their flock together, working through problems and difficulties and the complexities of a church body, the relationships that go into it, the politics of the church itself, marriages and funerals and counseling, and the list just goes on and on. They don't have time to try to wrap their heads around this, and I get that. The only thing I would like to see is then, the religious leadership, our Christian leadership, saying, "Hey, maybe we can vet out what is true, what is not. We'll ask people who have some expertise in this, and have them come alongside and help us to understand this in a way that we can now use as we relate this to our church body."
Right.
But for the most part, I think it's a matter of too busy. And in terms of Christian lay people, we just don't care because our own, and our own lives, because simply this, our own lives are so busy. We work our tail off all day long. In the evenings, we're running everywhere. Or else we're sitting and we're just saying, I am absolutely overwhelmed. So I'm not blaming anybody within the Christian world that way. I'm just saying these are the realities. And it took me a long time for me to, I guess, gain a little maturity in terms of how I view it and go, okay, it's not about me, Carl. It's not about the fact that they're ignoring the warnings, but it is the reality of a world where everybody has their attention tugged in 100 different directions.
Right. Yeah. No, I've had similar experiences. I mean, actually, the most pushback, unfortunately, has always been with like fellow believers. Just to tell.
Yes.
It's unfortunate, but that's what it's been. Even conversations with my pastor and things like that, and pretty much he's even told me to shut down this ministry that I'm doing right now as well.
A pat on your head.
Yeah, he's like, look, Carl. Same thing. He literally actually like put his hand over me, little pat, and he's like, hey man.
Hey Chuck.
Hey Chuck. Why don't you focus on other things other than what you're doing? You know what I mean? I'm like, oh gosh. But it's amazing to me that you can be in the middle of it like that, family, in the middle of chaos, literally in the middle, like in Sheol, and not even know that you're there, and
Right.
it's crazy. It's crazy. But, your book, Game of Gods, I'd like you to explain a couple of things for people that might not know. I mean, we've had Heiser on the show early on, and maybe people didn't listen. And I think some of your work kind of ties into how some of his research, the unseen realm and the cosmic geography and the gods and all that. And it's called Game of Gods. First of all, I want to know what game is being played here, and who are these gods, or what are you referencing? What's going on with the title of your book?
Well, the game is not a fun game. It's a serious game. It's
Right.
a game we play within humanity, generation after generation. It goes back to Genesis chapter 3, and the lie, the ultimate Gnostic lie that you can be as God, you can live forever, and you'll have the knowledge of good and evil. And yes, we have the knowledge of good and evil. That was the one part of that whole equation that was true. We do both good and evil. But we're not as God, and we don't live forever. And so ever since then, we have been playing these games of gods against each other, and it comes out in a variety of complexities and different ways. But the idea of the gods could simply be from Genesis chapter 3. It's really the idea that creation itself is declaring it is divine. And humanity is doing that. I mean, it's Romans chapter 1. Romans 1 and Genesis 3 fit together very well. Romans 1, Paul talks about how we are worshiping the creation and not the creator. And then, if you read the rest of Romans 1, it goes into the social, relational, sexual consequences that comes when we do that. And so Game of Gods reflects that Romans 1 and Genesis 3, and really the Tower of Babel, that aspect of mankind saying creation, God, man, nature, we are all one. And we now have to build our temple of man, our new Babel. We build our temple of man specifically in an age of re-enchantment, where we say collectively, it is about we, and we are doing this. And so the gods being referenced include everything from putting the state up, putting up the idea of world order, which is bigger than the state, as a god. And my chapter on world order is entitled The Cult of World Order, because it is a cult. It's a political cult that says salvation comes through collective political action at a global level. The chapter I have on interfaithism demonstrates that through the idea of spiritual politics. All of these are just expressions of this idea that the creation is in charge of its own destiny and its own meaning. But I also go into the elements of neo-paganism. Chapter 7, which is all about myth and re-enchantment, and how myth isn't simply a fable. Myth, in this respect, is the idea of a guiding story, a narrative, and we are pulling from the ancient world to try to find this new narrative, this new myth that allows all of mankind to come together. So, chapter 7, I jump into those pagan elements. In fact, one of the events I talk about is Paganicon, which I attended in 2017, and then attended it back in March of this year. And Paganicon this year was a gathering of 800 witches.
What?
Wiccans,
Wait. You said
Luciferians.
Paganicon?
That's right.
Like Comic-Con?
That's right.
That just sounds funny to me. Like, hey, we're gonna let's do a con. Let's do a convention. Let's do a Paganicon.
But keep in mind, this is the convention, the pagan convention of a pagan homeland that's in the United States called Paganistan. It's their affectionate term for their homeland, for their region. It's the most concentrated region in the U.S., having the most Wiccans, the most covens, the most circles, the largest expression of neo-paganism. Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Twin Cities region, going out as far as western Wisconsin, northern Iowa, and then further up St. Cloud, up to even to Fargo.
Wow.
Yeah, there is no other spot in the continent that has as a diverse and large pagan footprint as there is in the Twin Cities region. It's called Paganistan, and it's called that for a reason. And so this year I went was the 9th conference or convention of Paganistan, hence the term Paganicon.
Oh, you went.
Yeah.
Yes. I went in 2017, and I went this year as well.
You ever wonder, just like my imagination runs a little wild, forgive me, Carl, but you ever wonder
okay.
if by accident you might have shooken the hand of the future Antichrist? Like, how are you doing there? You know,
and he knows who you are. He's like, hey, Carl. You're like, hey, how'd you know my name?
Hey, yeah. Before you even introduce yourself, he already knows how you doing, Carl. I know all of your work.
No, it's more like, hello, Carl. How are you doing?
Oh, he's
remember,
Russian?
He's Russian because remember, Left Behind told us.
Left Behind told us.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh,
Your
that's
name
right.
is Carl.
Yes. Oh, that's funny. I have met some interesting people. I'll tell you that much. I've had some really good conversations, and with people who with worldviews that completely clash with mine. But the one thing that is, as I've gone to these events, I've gone to 35, 40, maybe 45 of them. I've got to sit down and actually start counting how many. I used to do that, and I haven't for a while. The one thing that for myself has been beneficial, just for me, is that it has given me a certain amount of empathy, because now I see them more as people and less as enemies per se, recognizing that really the enemy is the power and principalities behind it.
Yeah. You know what? That's so important. I think because, I mean, I've seen some of your work and I've seen what you've been doing, and I think your approach is completely different. It's very conversational. You open up the conversation to try and find out, hey, what's this person's worldview, and then you share. And,
right.
And you the way you share is by asking questions, which is very much how Jesus used to do it. You know what I mean? Like, he would ask questions and open up the conversation, and I think it's very important. It's a trait that we as Christians, as believers, I think primarily have lost. We're very easy to attack. Like, that's satanic, that's evil, and you're gonna burn if you don't change. And I see that a lot, especially in the Facebook realm and in the social medias and stuff like that. And I'm like, come on, guys, like, that is, I don't know, I mean, do what you want, people, but I mean,
it's counterproductive.
It is counterproductive in my opinion, and
all you're doing is reinforcing the negative stereotypes people have of us already.
Right.
This is one of the reasons why when we talk about going to Burning Man, we do not want people showing up with picket signs and bullhorns and literally making fools of themselves. Yeah. No, go there to be the hands and feet of Jesus, in the sense that you are bringing truth, absolute truth, biblical truth, with absolute grace, biblical grace. You need to be able to do both and hold both in your hands while you're there. But you're right. Asking questions that's so important. I mean, that's really, really important. That came through many, many years ago, and I kind of developed that model a little bit from a friend. He's deceased now. His name was Dr. Adair. I met him back in, I think 98 or 99 in Indiana. I was at a used bookstore, and I was in the occult section.
What are you doing there, Carl?
You're looking for stuff, eh? And
sure, okay.
And I'm reading a book. I'm looking at some book, and this stereotypical professor type. He's got the pot belly. He's got a fuzzy old sweater. His glasses are past his nose. The kind of an unkept beard. Typical, stereotypical professor from the 1940s. This guy walks up to me, and he just looks at me. He says in his lower, slow voice, "So, do you really believe what you're reading?"
Yeah. That's an interesting first question.
Then we ended up talking. We became friends, and I found out that was his asking questions approach in bookstores to find out what people think and to engage in a conversation that brought it back around to Jesus Christ.
Oh.
My wife used the same approach this past March when we were in Fargo, North Dakota. We were at a used bookstore. She overheard a young man asking the bookshop owner about where to get a certain text on shamanism. My wife kind of came alongside as he was in the New Age occult section. She said to him, she says, "Hey, let me help you find this book." And and they're rifling through the books together a bit, and then she just looks at him and says, "Why are you interested in this subject? This is not this kind of subject I would expect a younger person," because he was college age
Mm-hmm.
to be interested in. And that started about a 15-20 minute conversation. I came into it. We ended up talking for a good chunk of time, 20 minutes or so. We agreed that in 2 days, because we were there for a couple of days, we would get together. We ended up having a breakfast for 2 hours as we shared Christianity versus oneism, as we went through oneism versus otherness back and forth. I gave him a copy of my book, and he was absolutely enthralled that somebody would take the time to sit and talk about Christianity, religion, philosophy, spirituality. He was hungry and he had nowhere to turn. But all my wife did was go up and help in what seems to be something that most Christians would shy away from, and do so in such a manner that it opened up a conversation that we could go to the truth.
I believe that confidence in what you believe in plays a big role in how you approach others. And
right,
you and your wife obviously are very confident people in your own belief system and your own ideals, because you've been doing this for a long time there, Carl. And so I feel, not only I feel, but I believe, and I've noticed it a lot, that a lot of Christians just aren't confident in what they believe in. They believe that Jesus came, died on the cross, and died for them, and resurrected, and gave them eternal life. But they, because of what you said earlier, are too busy, quote unquote, aren't confident, don't have that confidence inside of them to really dig down deep and to even question why they believe the things they believe. They just go with the flow. So how can you help somebody else, How can you help somebody else through their own struggles if you've never even engaged in those own struggles yourself? And it's a bit terrifying, for sure.
Exactly. And that's the importance of those of us who've been around the block for a little bit to come alongside and help carefully guide and teach and instruct others. We lead a weekly Bible study where we end up talking a lot about worldviews and all kinds of things, and it's geared towards college and those who are engaged in the younger part of their career life. And so, I mean, it's not a big group. We have between 6, sometimes there's only 4 that shows up, and sometimes there's almost 15 that show up. And every week we try to sit down with them, and we go. Right now we're working through the Book of Acts, and just to literally to feed into their lives. And we've been doing this for 3 or 4 years now, and it's been wonderful, just wonderful. As the younger generation has helped us and taught us. And in turn, we have taught them and fed into their lives and back and forth. It really is about impacting one life at a time. We can have big programs. We can have all kinds of big agendas. I can write a great, big, thick book. But the bottom line is you hope that somewhere, one person, somewhere, will be drawn to the truth of Jesus Christ, or if they already are Christians, drawn to a stronger faith in him, so that they also can be ambassadors for Christ. We're called to be ambassadors. To be an ambassador means you know the culture, you understand the culture, you know your position as the official and legal representative of your king. That's who you are. I can't think of a higher calling than that. And then you know the culture, and you engage in the culture. You don't become one with their worldview. You don't become part of the world, but you are in it, and you are working to be an effective messenger, literally a truth teller in the culture. We need to rethink what it means to be an ambassador. We read that in Paul's writings, and we're going, well, whatever. We know what an ambassador is. Really? Do we? Yeah, I know. So, I mean, that's what we have to become, guys.
Yeah.
I've been asking other friends who've been in our community, ultimately, what is the goal of trying to know all of this stuff? And we need to know this stuff. But what is the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is so that when we see it all around us, we can speak truth to it tactfully and in love.
No, indeed. I think that's very important. It's like, you both of you mentioned it. I guess to sum up with you both mentioning, I think it's the confidence in the knowledge of God first of all, and then also where culture is at. And I think going back to a little bit earlier, the reason why a lot of Christians are disconnected is because they're unaware of where culture is heading and what the plans are for culture. And like you said, that sometimes they'll only find out until it's in their own household, and it's unfortunate, but
right.
It takes that ability or that knowledge to understand like where this is culture now, where is it going, and why is it going there, and then you can better use your knowledge of God to apply it to where the secular world wants the world to go, and so I think it's very important. I think that's one of the reasons we started the show, really, and that's why we call the show what it is, because we want people to be at least have a decent amount of information to have that confidence to share to people, not just your everyday person, but people that are searchers, question a lot of things, and people like yourselves that talk to even prominent people, and you're in places like Burning Man talking to some jeweler from Paris. You know what I mean? You just never know what God's going to put in front of you, and we got to be prepared and have the tools to speak of God in a manner that will reach people's hearts. And I think that's important. So.
It is, and that's why we took the approach of Acts 17 when it came to even naming our camp at Burning Man, because if you read Acts 17, Paul goes to Athens. It's a pagan culture, very raw pagan culture. I think if we would go back as Christians and put ourselves into the early church, into their setting, I think our jaws would be on the ground, seeing the paganization of that culture. And so there's Paul at Athens with the temples, pagan temples around him. He's in the middle of a pagan environment. I mean, a very blatant pagan environment. And he finds, of course, the monument to the unknown or the unknowable God, and he uses that as the launching pad to go into the gospel of Christ, going so far as to even quote the hymn of Zeus, as he is making a point to demonstrate, to find that common connecting point that he can now relate to them, the true God, not Zeus, not the pagan gods, but the true God, the God who is the creator and who is therefore different than creation, and the one who ends up resurrecting Jesus Christ, because he brings that in as well at the end of Acts 17, judgment and resurrection. So, I mean, there is something to be said about knowing your culture. We are, and I hate to say this as Christians, we are hopefully, woefully ignorant. We're ignorant about Scripture, but we're ignorant more than just that. We're ignorant about history. We're ignorant about social issues. We're ignorant about economics. We're ignorant about politics. We're ignorant about art. Can anybody in the Christian world define art and the biblical perspective of art? We're ignorant about so many things. And I'm still learning. You're learning. We're all still learning. But ignorance isn't bliss. The Christian community for the longest time has had this notion that ignorance seems to be bliss. No, it's not. It's just ignorant.
Ignorance is just ignorance. You know what? We don't want to take too much more of your time there, Carl, because we know you're a busy man and you got a lot of things to do. But we want to thank you so much for having been on our show, and I think that's a good place to end it. About ignorance is not bliss, and we need to.
We have a responsibility.
Yeah, we have a responsibility, because with great power comes great responsibility. So, thank you very much for coming on our show, for being a part of this. We know it took a long time to get you out here, but we want to thank you. And before you go, I just want to, we want to have you plug things in, but I got one more question for you real quick. Your photography is amazing. I've been seeing it on you on your Facebook. I love to see your photography. When did you get into that? Is it something that you like to do often, or?
I have zero training. I've got no training with this whatsoever. I just somehow can point a camera or even a crappy phone at something and seem to take a picture. So I'm thankful. I mean, for whatever reason, it works out.
They're really good. As a photographer, you got an eye for that. It's really nice. It's really nice stuff.
But
Man.
Whenever if you later retire from your Camp of No God business, you you gotta
take up some photography. Yeah, and I'm blessed to live in a part of the world where we have some amazing sunsets and just some really really neat landscape. Even though it is the prairies. Where I live in Manitoba, there's a beauty to it as well. Hey, before I let you guys go, or before you let me go, just if people want to read the book is called Game of Gods. You can go order it off of Amazon. You can check out some excerpts of it. You can go through the bibliography at gameofgods.ca. If anybody in your audience is interested in helping us out with doing a fundraiser, we have a fundraising page for our Camp of the Unknown Gods. You can do a GoFundMe. Just search in GoFundMe for Camp of the Unknown God 2019. And we're raising funds to try to help offset the costs of going back to the burn. And just, keep us in prayer. Keep us in prayer as we are trying to get back to Burning Man. And then beyond that, as I continue to go to events and to do the research, to do the hard analysis, and then bring it to guys like you.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So, Carl, stick with us. And folks, listen to these tunes, and we'll be right back.